Good morning to everybody. We're just about to get started. We have a few more people coming in from the waiting room, and this is a good chance for me to introduce myself. I'm Joy Sasiski. I am the interim CEO and the Chief Philanthropy Officer here at the Federation, and we are very happy that you've joined us today and to welcome our special guests. You just heard Eric Fingerhut, his voice. He looks like he's in his office in New York, although he's often traveling, so we're delighted that he could join us today. And our colleagues, Shira Ganesh, who I'm going to introduce in a few minutes from JDC, and Barak Luzan, the director of our Federation's Israel office. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to provide just a couple of remarks to get us started. I'm going to introduce each of our three speakers, and then I'm going to turn it over to Eric, Shira, and Barak, who are going to make some comments and observations about the situation in Ukraine and how it's unfolding from where they sit. And then we'll have a chance for some Q&A that I'll moderate. You can send your questions directly to Rachel Kaber or put them in the chat, and we'll try and moderate all of them and get to as many as we can. Again, I'm really glad to see you here today. As the situation in Ukraine continues to evolve, so do the needs for members of our Jewish community, and we are committed to helping those who have fled as refugees, to those who are returning back to Ukraine, and for the vast majority of Ukrainians, particularly in the Jewish community, who have stayed in Ukraine and never left. And we're here to learn a little bit more about what's going on now. For decades, federations, including ours, have been supporting the needs of global Jewry around the world, including through our historic partnership with the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. And we've provided as a system, and Eric's going to talk a little bit about that, I hope, federations across North America, there are about 135 or so of them, he'll give us the numbers, have provided something like $60 million of support for urgent humanitarian needs related to this conflict right now. And I am really proud that our Bay Area Jewish community has come together to mobilize nearly $5 million since the start of the war, including over $3 million to the Federation's Ukraine Emergency Fund. And we're going to talk a little bit about our work through the system at Jewish Federations of North America, of which our federation is a part of, and a little bit about the long-term view that we're starting to take, because we're committed to being there for the long term as the country rebuilds, and we think about the kind of needs that our Jewish communities will have, both those who choose to stay, those who go to Israel, and those who may even come to the Bay Area. So today I am delighted to introduce Eric Fingerhut. He is an American politician, an attorney, an academic administrator, and he serves as the president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America. Prior to his work with the federations, he served as 6 years as the CEO of International Hillel. And before that, he served as a corporate vice president of education and STEM learning business at Battelle Memorial Institute. He was a chancellor of the Ohio Board of Regents, an Ohio State Senator, and a member of the United House States of Representatives. I have been particularly glad to get to know Eric over these last few months and traveled with him to the Polish-Ukrainian border at the start of the war. Many of you joined us for a video call right after that to hear about our boots on the ground. I'm also happy to introduce Shira Ganesh, who's the director of JDC's field operations for the former Soviet Union, where she oversees operations in Russia, Belarus, Georgia, and the Asian republics. Her career at JDC began in 1997 as a budget officer in the FSU division. And she is, I know, very proud to work for JDC and be in a role that allows her to take part in the resurgence of Jewish life in her birthplace, which is Ukraine, and where she's been spending a lot of her time these days. And finally, you'll hear from Barak Luzan. He serves as the director of our Israel office from San Francisco Federation. He happens to be here in the San Francisco office with us this week, so we're so happy to have him local. He's devoted his career to strengthening Israeli democracy and creating equal opportunity for everyone, as well as reshaping the Israel diaspora relationships that are so important to us. So thank you all for being here. And Eric, the floor is yours. And thank you for kicking us off.
Thank you, Joy. What a privilege it is to be with all of you at the incredible Federation in San Francisco. I want to express my gratitude to Joy, who has such respect across our entire system and is doing such an amazing job for you, as well as my colleagues at JDC, whose work has been truly life-saving and life-changing during this emergency, and great to see some old friends on the Zoom who I've worked with before, and appreciate your commitment to San Francisco and to the Jewish community. So I want to start by giving you just one of the little pieces of Torah that I've heard recently that have inspired me so much since the war started on February 24th. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, some of you know, the Rav, the famous Jewish theologian of the 20th century, talked about how Judaism teaches us that our responsibility is not limited to our own actions, but we are charged with historic responsibility, that people are called upon to shape history, to be historically involved, to direct history's unfolding toward worthwhile objectives. That's what we're engaged in. We are shaping history's unfolding. We're not letting history just happen to us. We are shaping history. And he said to do that, we have to do two things. We have to be always vigilant, ready for action. And second, when action is called for, we have to act effectively. I couldn't summarize better what the Jewish Federation system, including your incredible federation, has been about. We were vigilant and ready for action. And then since action was called for, we've acted effectively. This war broke out on February 24th on a Thursday night when Russia invaded Ukraine. By that weekend, we knew that emergency funds would be needed in large quantities. We couldn't possibly know what would be totally needed. We set a goal of $20 million from across our 146 Jewish federations. Our federations asked us for what we call a fair share number. What would their share of $20 million be? We told everybody based on their relative size what their fair share would be. My friends, within 7 days, every single federation had met or exceeded their fair share number. We were over $20 million within a week. And as Joy mentioned, in the 2 months or so since the war broke out, we have now exceeded, without even setting another goal, because we still couldn't know what the right goal would be, we have exceeded the $60 million mark from across the 146 Jewish federations. It's an extraordinary outpouring of support. And as Joy mentioned, she was there in the first week on the border. Representatives of over 60 communities have also come to the Poland-Ukraine border with us in order to see firsthand the story and to be able to bring that story back to their community. And by the way, we've also organized over 100 Russian-speaking professionals from our federations and from other Jewish communal organizations who have gone over to volunteer and to be frontline, supporting, augmenting what JDC and the Jewish Agency and other organizations are able to do. It's been amazing. But we now know, as you clearly know, you read the same newspapers I know. I don't have any inside, I don't have intelligence clearance. I haven't been on the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee for a number of years. We know that this is going to go on for a long time. And even if, God willing, the war ends soon, the massive dislocation, the massive destruction is going to be with us for a long time. The needs to rebuild, frankly, the expected further collapse of the Russian economy and political system is going to put huge pressure on our Russian Jewish brothers and sisters. the extraordinary number, not only of refugees who are still in Ukraine and in Europe that JDC is supporting, but also the almost 20,000 who have been brought to Israel now by the Jewish Agency. These are all people with extraordinary needs. As you know from reading the news, men of fighting age have not been allowed to leave the country. That means that all the Olim that we've seen so far and the refugees are either seniors, people who are not able to fight because of some disability, or women with young children, mothers with young children, or grandparents with young children with them. All of these are going to need extraordinary needs. Many people, of course, want to go back to Ukraine, or if they're still in Ukraine, want to go back to their homes, but they don't know. Do they have a home to go back to? Their businesses have been destroyed. And of course, the unimaginable death. We've seen some of the signs of the stories about the atrocities. And of course, we won't really even know what the extent of that is, the destruction of Mariupol and the other devastations of the war. So we know these needs are going to go on for a while to come. And so we are now at a moment where our community has to think long term. It's right after the crisis happens, there's a lot of energy, a lot of organizations come in and offer help, but it's really, this is the moment when the institutions of Jewish life, the Jewish federations, the established institutions like the Joint Distribution Committee, we are there for the long haul. We're the ones who are able to identify those ongoing needs and rally the community in a continued way around to meet these ongoing needs. So we're in the process of doing really three things right now, looking forward from here, which I'll share briefly, and then turn the program over to to the other speakers. But I'm happy to answer any questions and listen to your feedback that you might have. The first and foremost is a reminder that is needed, that our Federation annual campaigns are an essential component of this emergency response in Ukraine. How so? Well, Joy mentioned the long-standing relationship with the Joint Distribution Committee. In fact, the fact is that the Joint Distribution Committee was on the ground with skilled professionals like Shira, who's on the call here today, and her colleagues, who knew the territory, had the names of the Jewish community people who needed help, had their phone numbers, knew the governmental leaders, knew the roads, knew the bus companies, knew the shelters, had all the experience, had the relationship with the other relief organizations, both Jewish and non-Jewish. That isn't emergency funding. That's the core annual support that we provide so that they can have that staff and have that expertise in place. And by the way, my friends, there's no law of nature that says that there won't be another emergency breakout somewhere else in the world, even while the Ukrainian crisis is going on. We know that's possible and maybe even increasingly likely as the world descends into a more chaotic state. So when you're on the ground at the border, as Joy was, and as Arthur was, and others from your community, and I hope more of you will go. We'd like to take more of you to see it for yourself. When you see the extraordinary work of the Joint and of the other relief agencies, you are not seeing the emergency campaign. You are seeing the core funding that comes from our annual campaigns. However, as I've already mentioned, we know that there are extra needs. When you're seeing the extra hotels that have been reserved where all of the refugees are staying and are being supported, when you see the extra medicine, the extra security, the costs of food and medicine that have gone way up, the cost of the buses and the transportation to get people out of the country into relief, all of these things, that's the emergency funding you're seeing. And so we have asked our friends at the Joint and at the Jewish Agency and the other agencies to look out in the future. Now, we know no one can totally predict what the future needs are going to be, but there's some things we do know and that we can estimate. And so we are putting together the best estimate we can of what the ongoing emergency needs are, so we can also share with you what those needs are and what organizations are going to be absorbing them. In addition to the joint, the Jewish Federations have supported over 30 different organizations that have been providing the relief on the ground. And what we then do collectively is we sit together, and we have a representative of the San Francisco Federation on that committee. We sit together and we look at what are the needs across, which organizations are providing which kind of needs: travel, housing, medicine, humanitarian relief, travel to Israel, whatever the different needs are. How much have they been able to raise from other sources too? So thank God they've got other sources of resources. And what is the real need that we need to meet? That's the power of our collective working together to make sure that not only do we know what the needs are, but that we're filling the gaps where those needs are absolutely met. The final thing I just want to mention to you is that we know that this is a crisis of vast humanitarian proportions. It is not primarily targeted at the Jewish community for once in history. Jews are victims of it, but they're actually a small percentage of the overall victims. Our organizations, Israel Aid and JDC and Jewish Agency, do support anyone that comes, but we know that there are additional humanitarian needs, and many of our federations, whether it's resettling refugees here in North America or caring for refugees in Europe, are also involved, and we're helping engage with those extra needs of the broader humanitarian crisis, because Jews care for Jews and we take care of Jews, but Jews care for humanity, and we are going to be an important part of the broader global humanitarian relief efforts as well. With that, let me stop, turn it to my colleagues, but please, I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Eric. And Shira, please let us know what's happening on the ground.
Thank you, Joy, for inviting me. And thank you, the San Francisco Federation. Thank you, Eric, personally, and JFNA, for having me here and bringing the voice of the Ukrainian Jewish community. I would like to thank you for your commitment, for your generosity, for your care, and for your long-lasting support. We can all be very grateful and proud that we were able to build a vast infrastructure that we could mobilize in such difficult times. Maybe just a few words about our activities and infrastructure before the war. JDC's work in Ukraine provided humanitarian aid to 37,000 elderly Jews and supported children at risk, about 2,500 and their family members. And also we reached close to 30,000 Jews through community development programs, leadership programs, active Jewish teams, JCCs, volunteer infrastructure, and much more. Regarding the situation, actually it's been almost 3 months since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, and the toll has been devastating. The situation is very different across Ukraine. From the most difficult situation, which probably all of you heard, from Mariupol and some other smaller cities and villages with horrific consequences, where most of the city or the villages were damaged severely or destroyed. Other locations in the east and the south with active fighting, and also with difficult humanitarian situations such as Nikolaev in the south. The situation in Kiev, actually, and Chernigov, which is in northern Ukraine, southern Ukraine, actually improved since the Russians withdrew. But nowadays, the horrors that happened there are revealed. And, all of us also saw it in the news, and it's terrible. So what we see now is the new normal. Some cities are trying to restart their lives, while others are under attack, such as Odessa as well. 6 million Ukrainians have already fled the country, and millions more in the country are threatened by the ongoing conflict, internally displaced people. And among these groups are thousands of Jews fleeing Ukraine and those who remain behind. Recently, about 1 million already returned to their homes, and many others are planning to return. The number of people who are willing to evacuate now is very, very small, and the border crossings are not packed anymore. The urgent needs are met on both sides of the border, inside Ukraine and outside. We fully switched to emergency mode of operations and launched 11 hotlines. Sorry, Sharon? Can you please turn on my presentation? Thank you. Sharon?
We can see it, Shira, at least the first
Great.
slide. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's what I needed. Thank you. So we actually launched 11 hotlines. The first one was specifically for Ukraine because, you know, many people were fleeing, even employees, you know, were finding shelter, and the local hotlines that we already established before the war actually did not function. So the international hotline that we launched in Israel was the first one to operate. And then we already launched in all the bordering countries and also in Europe. We launched also a situation room in order to monitor the situation inside and outside of Ukraine and make the best informed decisions. And actually, if we're looking at the various services and that we provide, I must say that regarding those who remain in Ukraine, our main goal is to continue purchase food, medicine, and other essentials inside Ukraine. Whatever we find, we stockpile it in all of the chesed, the welfare centers across Ukraine, because no one knows what will happen next. We continue to provide material support with bank cards to our clients so they can purchase in advance and also stockpile at home whatever they needed. We also launched humanitarian aid effort, huge humanitarian effort. Actually, up until now, we were able to ship in more than 300 tons of supply, mostly with food and medicine. We opened hubs in Lviv, in Western Ukraine, in Chernivtsi on the border with Romania, and in Odessa, close to the border with Moldova, and shipping in all the essential goods, which is very important. From there, we deliver it to the different locations across Ukraine, and our dedicated volunteers distribute the aid to the clients' homes. Also, the home care continued to be provided almost throughout all of Ukraine in places where there is intensive fighting. So we prioritize the harshest cases, and many of our home care workers stay to sleep over at clients' homes in order to continue to take care of them, because without it, they wouldn't survive. Regarding evacuation, our goal is to save as many lives as possible. At the beginning, of course, many young people left, those who were stronger, those who were well off. And later we started our evacuation campaign, and actually encouraging people to flee and helping them with transportation and actually with sheltering and stopping on their way to Western Ukraine or to towards other countries crossing the border. Up until now, we were able to evacuate from the homes 12,600 people. And for also for refugees, we have been providing shelter and housing in partnership with the various communities, the refugee camps or hotels or even apartments in Western Ukraine for those who decided to remain in Ukraine, to be closer to the homes, or they didn't want to leave their families and they wanted to be closer. Then when the minute, you know, the situation is become safer, so they can return. Also, we provide all of these opportunities in Moldova, Romania, Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia on the borders, and inside Europe in partnership with the other Jewish communities. And for those who want to make Aliyah, we partner with Jaffe very closely and with IFCJ. Up until now, we've managed to provide shelter to more than 21,000 refugees. Also, we've been providing food, medicine, medical treatment, guidance, what to do next. People, you know, when they cross the border, they are puzzled, they don't know what to do next. And, you know, when the time continues and the, you know, the war actually hasn't stopped yet, and people had some hope that it will stop very soon, but since it didn't happen, so they need to make decisions what's next. We brought in Russian-speaking volunteers and continue to do it, professionals providing social, emotional support, and also we organize different activities for the children. If we are looking into the future, so we are exploring already resettlement and integration of the refugees in these new communities. for the midterm, and maybe even for the long term. Again, this is, of course, upon their decision. We're speaking about language classes, orientation, informal and formal education, employment opportunities, housing, and so on. Actually, we will provide with case management, the same as we worked in Ukraine and other countries, professional support, mapping, and assessing the needs of each family and providing whatever is needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shira, and for holding, this trauma with such care for our community, and also on behalf of all of us here in the Bay Area, and for sharing those stories. Barak, we'd love to hear from you and a little bit about, what you're seeing on the ground in Israel.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for joining. So we now see that the flow of refugees has slowed, as those who could leave have left, and others have returned to the cities that the Ukrainian army has held or recaptured. It is unclear whether this stage of precipitate further immigration to Israel as people assess what remains of their lives, belonging, and loved ones. It is also unclear whether additional people will live as humanitarian corridors open. It is estimated, as Eric mentioned before, that roughly 25,000 Ukrainians have arrived in Israel to date, 11,000 of them as new immigrants and the remainder as refugees. It's about 400, 500 new immigrants every week are arriving in Israel kind of on a weekly basis. Russian Jewry has also started seeking refuge in Israel. 3,000 more than 3,000 already actually, Russian Jews have already immigrated to Israel, and the Jewish Agency is processing an additional 26,000 applications. The different population groups are challenging the system in Israel, as their needs are varied and they are entitled to different sets of benefits. For example, the integration and absorption of new immigrants is typically the responsibility of the national government and local authorities. However, the refugees and people who are in a different status are dealt with from kind of different perspective of Jaffe and refugee centers that the JDC has set up, and so on and so forth. Federation has been focusing its effort through the years on strengthening Israeli society as a democratic and shared society with equal opportunities for all. We have to to be here in this moment, and we wanna make sure that we're relevant for the kind of current challenges that we're all facing. Our efforts moving forward are aligned with this vision. While carefully assessing the evolving needs of the newcomers, we will be focusing on three primary challenges. We will do that, however, from the mindset of our strategic kind of direction. We've been thinking and learning from previous waves of absorption. In Israel, we used to treat newcomers as they were the kind of subject of change, right? They need to change in order to become Israelis. We need to work with them, acquire soft skills and hard skills, and integrate into the society, and so on and so forth. We saw them as the subject of change. However, we also learned that it's not enough. If the Israeli society refuses to accept and to receive and to have these folks become part of Israel, then these efforts are not enough. So the work that we do is actually on a policy level, on a leadership level, and on a very hands-on kind of with NGOs. So on the policy level, what we do, we support the collaborative work of the relevant government ministries based on key learnings from previous waves of absorption. How does Israel need to change in order to receive and to accept and to absorb in the best way these waves of absorption? The second one is helping to integrate the newcomers to the Israeli workforce. Once again, not only working with them on acquiring skills, but actually working with the workforce, with the businesses as well. And the third one is the integration into the education system, both based, the kind of the elementary, middle school, but then also kind of higher education. Once again, not only working with the newcomers, but actually working with the institutions in order to adapt and change for them to be the home of everyone.
Thank you, Brock. We'd love to open it up for questions, and you can post them in the chat, and you can message me or Rachel Kaber, who I work with directly, and we'll go through the queue. And I have one that I thought maybe I'd ask Eric to start. We've done a number of these calls since the war broke out, and people, in addition to giving, whether it's to the annual campaign of the Ukraine Emergency Fund, they'd like to know, if there's something hands-on that they can do or a way to volunteer. And I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about what the Jewish Federations of North America is doing.
Thank you for the question, Joy. So I'll give you three quick things. One is early on in the crisis, when we were speaking with with JDC, and Brock and Shira both mentioned the role of the Jewish Agency, which is when somebody says, I want to go to Israel, they take them from that moment on and process them and get them to transport them, get them to Israel, help them get into Israeli society. Both of them, when we talked to both of these organizations, they said, we need help on the ground, but we need two things, well, really three things. We need people who could speak the language, because you've got to be able to communicate with the refugees. We need people who can stay a little while. Don't come for 2 hours or 4 hours or 1 day even. If you can come and stay for a week, 2 weeks, and really learn the ropes and help us. And third, especially if you've got some skills, clinical skills, social work skills, particularly needed. So we set up a volunteer hub. We've been recruiting Russian-speaking communal professionals from across the country through your federations. We've sent over 100 Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers to work for JDC to supplement, what JDC and the Jewish Agency are able to do with professionals. I got to just say one quick story. I'll promise I'll tell it really quick, but it represents everything we stand for. Our Federation executive in Columbia, South Carolina, Anna Zeranov, I'm not going to get her last name right, Zeranov. Anna was born in Ukraine, was eligible for the law of return because one of her four grandparents was Jewish. It did not have a strong Jewish identity, but something in her motivated her to make Aliyah. She was brought by the Jewish Agency to Israel as a young adult. Her Jewish identity blossomed in Israel. She came as an Israel Fellow to college campus in America under the auspices of the Jewish Agency, worked at Emory University, where she became more familiar with America, ended up working in Columbia, South Carolina for the Jewish Federation, and then through our volunteer hub went back to the Poland-Ukraine border and was the first person greeting refugees across the border in their own language as they came. So I talk about how our community helps people, come full circle. So that's number one. Number two, we know that there's a lot of people who don't speak Ukrainian or Russian who want to volunteer. We're working very hard and believe soon we will have many more volunteer opportunities. But it has to be real. It has to be real work and real needs. So stay tuned. We'll get that information out to you quickly. And then third, the refugee resettlement in North America. I know that your federation and your Jewish Family Service and others are deeply involved in refugee resettlement, not just of Jews. Of course, as we've said, the number the percentage of the total refugee population coming here who are actually Jewish is going to be very small. But there's a growing number of refugees arriving. There's a need to support them, frankly, to raise funds, to sponsor families under the President Biden's Unite for Ukraine program requires a sponsorship of a family, of by a church or a synagogue or a federation or a donor, a particular family donor. And then they're going to need jobs, and they're going to need housing, and they're going to need childcare and all sorts of other support. So we're also, as you are locally, organizing a national effort to help to volunteer to help the refugees. So lots to come on that. The rules of the new federal program just came out in the last week or two. So we need people just a little patience, but we will be doing this, and we're partnering together with JDC and with HIAS and with a number of other organizations on that refugee effort.
That's great. And that was another question that I got in the private chat. So you sort of answered both at the same time. And I'll add, because we do have somebody from our partner agency in the East Bay Jewish Family and Children's Services on the call, that there are refugees that are coming to the Bay Area. Some of them have come from the southern border, although I believe that that migration has come to a stop, but there are families that are relocating here, but there are a lot of Ukrainian. Priority is going to communities that are prioritizing family reunification. And we know that there's some also large cities like Chicago and New York that have large Ukrainian populations, but we also, through our work with the Jewish Federations of North America, provide advocacy services. So like when there is an opportunity for us to help with that, I think you'll find a lot of support from the Bay Area here.
Thank you. And I was going to mention that, so thank you for doing that. That we, you of course support from your annual campaign advocacy efforts in Sacramento and locally, and through us, you supported in Washington. Just last week, we had 300 people at what we call a Washington conference. And one of the issues that we lobbied Congress on collectively was refugee assistance and also opening the doors to more refugees. The president's initial program is for 100,000. It hasn't been fully subscribed yet, but we hope and expect that there will be much more than that. You think about the ratio of 25,000 in Israel to the size of the Israeli population to 100,000 to the size of the American population. We can do much more.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? This will be the last chance that we have for questions, and then we'll end on time. You can put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll start to wrap up by saying thank you. And there are a lot of people to thank on this call. Our speakers, certainly Eric and Shira and Barak, who are all taking time away, particularly Eric and Shira, who are leading the effort on the ground. And we really appreciate them being here. I hope that we had a question about this on a previous call. But you're doing God's work. We know that it's very hard, and we hope that you're taking care of yourselves too. And it's hard to do that sometimes in the middle of a war or crisis, but your health and safety is a priority for us because we want to make sure that you can do the good work for our Jewish community in the Bay Area and abroad. So thank you for all that you're doing. And thank you to everybody who's on this call for showing up. A lot of you have been showing up for some of our other calls. You've made gifts to the Ukraine Emergency Fund. 100% of what we've raised has gone to our partners through JDC and now through a broader partnership with the Jewish Federations of North America so that we can make sure we take a longer view on the work that we have ahead of us, including refugee resettlement outside of Ukraine, particularly with Aliyah, and to help rebuild and make sure that our Jewish community stays strong in Ukraine. And thank you also for your gifts to the annual campaign. We have some of our most longstanding supporters who are on this call, and I just want to say thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that our campaign closes on June 30th. So I hope that you will make a gift if you have not already. And I think Eric did the best job of talking about how our annual campaign allows us to be in any emergency for our Jewish community, whether locally or globally, and supporting that infrastructure is just really critical. So I don't see any other questions. I want to thank everybody for taking time to join us on their lunch break. And thank you, Eric, Shira, and Barak.
Thank you all.
Thank you.